Here we go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning PESACHIM Daf Samach Dalid. We will begin by resolving the stira that we pointed out yesterday between the two brises. And really, we had two contradictions. Number one, if there was someone performing Melika. Guys, I have to start again. My other machine is not working. A minute. Coming right back. Whoopa.
Boker Tov, everybody.
Boker Tov, everybody.
Good morning.
Every now and then my machine doesn't work. The other machine. So we're going to get it. Take two. Hello. All right, Nachamal. With the help of Hashem, we are learning PESACHIM Daf Samach Dalid. We're going to begin today's daf by resolving the contradiction that we pointed out yesterday between the two brises, learning the sugya of exactly who is in violation of owning chametz while doing the avodah. There's no doubt that that refers to the Erev Pesach, bringing a carbon Pesach on Erev Pesach, and whether the kohen that's doing the shchita, whether the kohen that's doing the zrika, whether the bnei chabura for whom the carbon is being geshachtin, they for sure will be violating the lo sishchat al chametz. However, the question is, if someone is doing melika, which melika is only shayach by a bird carbon, which is certainly not going to be the carbon Pesach carbon, will that be included? Will the moilik be over on lo sishchat al chametz? So we had a contradiction in brises. We also had a contradiction regarding whether the kohen who is going to be burning the fats, the kohen who is going to be doing the haktara of the emurim on the mizbeach, if he owns chametz when it's being makdir the chalavim, the evarim of the carbon pesach, whether he's over on leisishchat al chametz. Actually, Rav Papa began the sugya by saying yes, because of the hekesh between leisishchat and loyolin. Whoever is associated and whoever is able to violate the loyolin, which includes the kohen, not burning the chalavim, allowing them to get overnighted, so then there's a lav of loyolin. He should be included in the lav of lisishchat al chametz. But again, there's a stira in brises, and we're going to first go and resolve those brises. The Gemara then is going to explain the reason behind the shita of Rabbi Yehuda that said in the Mishnah Daf Samach Gimel that the lav of lisishchat not only applies to the bringing of the carbon Pesach, but it also applies to the offering of the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbayim on that of Pesach. And then the Gemara is going to explain the source for Reb Shimon, who applies the Leisishchat most broadly. And as we explained, Reb Shimon holds that this refers to the offering of the carbon Pesach on Yud Dalid, on Erev Pesach, and any carbon that's brought during the Mayed, during the Yom Tov of Pesach, if, same concept, if the kohen offering, if the person for whom the kohen is offering owns chametz, so aside of the violation of Aliyah Matzah, there's also the lav of Leisishchat. Where does Rab Shimon get that from? We're going to start on Daf Samach Dalet Amadalef, a Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to be fascinating. We're going to be describing exactly how the Pesach was offered. How is it offered in the Beis HaMikdash? The Mishnah is going to be going through tremendous detail, some of which is that the gates of the Azara are closed when the Azara is filled with people, even if many more still have to offer. So as we will see, there were various groups that came in at different times to bring the Korban Pesach. Actually, we're going to have on Daf Samach Daled Amud Beis a machlokes between Abaye and Rabbi, a fascinating machlokes, exactly who closed the gates of the Azara. Abaye holds that Somchinan Anisa, that it was a miracle. It was so Hashem knew when the Azara is full, adding more people will pose a danger, amongst other halachic issues like we'll explain. So the gates closed by themselves. Rava holds that Lo Samchinan Anisa. Many people say, Chazal tell us that Lo Samchinan Anisa. It's a machlokes Abaye and Rava. When we will learn the sugya, we're going to chazer the Rebbe's understanding, the Rebbe's Torah of the general rule, the basis, the base of Abaye and Rava, underlying all of their arguments. And we'll quote the Gemara in Brachas Daf Memches that Abaye was connected to Makiv Harachik. We'll explain what that means. That Rava is connected to Makiv HaKarev, and that's Mamish connected. That Rava says Lo Samchinan Anisa, and Abaye says Samchinan Anisa. We're going to have a Gavaldik story of a census that was taken by a king of how many Jews there are on Erev Pesach through the offering of the Korban Pesach and much more. We left off on top of Daf Samach Daled Amud Aleph. Again, the problem is that we had two braises and there was a contradiction. Melika, Amalika, and Kasha, Haktora, Haktora. And the Gemara now is going to respond, is going to answer and take away that contradiction. All right, says the Gemara. You are coming with a contradiction in between two braises, which means that you understood each one separately. Your only problem is that they contradict each other. Hold on. Before you come to the contradiction, the second braisa has a eternal contradiction. And the second braisa says, Loy amru ella bepesach bilvad, as we had in Daf Samach Gimel Amid Beis, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid, in middle of the second braisa, clearly that the whole lab of Leisishchat al Chametz is only regarding the offering of the Korban Pesach, and then right away the braisa continues. V'hader tana echad hashoichet, ve'echad hazoyrik, ve'echad hamoylik. There's no malika by Korban Pesach. Malika is only by a bird korban. Ve'echad hamazeh. Mazeh is also that which is done to the bird korban, squeezing the blood out on the walls of the Mizbeach. So therefore, we must say the following, that the second braisa, the latter part of the second braisa, as well as the author of the first braisa, both follows the Tana of Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon, as we explained when we learned the Mishnah, that Rab Shimon is the one that applies Leisishchat al Chametz very broadly. However, on Erev Pesach, only during the bringing of the Korban Pesach, only b'negei the Korban Pesach ayer oiver leisishchat al chametz. It's only during Pesach that Rab Shimon says that if there is an ownership of chametz, again machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, where the chametz needs to be. But if there's an ownership of chametz, then you are violating leisishchat al chametz concerning all the korbanos, including the bird korbanos, but only during Pesach. And now it's Pasha. So Malika, Amalika, Loy Kashem, the first braisa that says that if you perform Malika, you're not going to be chayiv. You know what the braisa is referring to? Kan ba'arba asad. Yeah, that if, like we mentioned, if a person is bringing a bird korban on that of Pesach in the afternoon, for example, a mechusar kippurim, for which we learned that will be the other exception, that you can bring a bird korban after the Tamar Shel Beinu Arbayim, even though you own chametz, and even though we are following Rab Shimon. However, even Rab Shimon limits the lab of Leisishchat al Chametz on Erev Pesach only for the Korban Pesach. And Khan, the second braisa that says explicitly, like we just quoted, that you'll be chayiv during Malika on Leisishchat al Chametz if you own chametz, that's v'choy lo yishol mayid, in which Rab Shimon holds l'shitasei that this lav applies to the entire Yom Tov of Pesach concerning all the karbanis. And ve'ide Rav Shimoni. Many people say that this sounds to be extra words, and actually some don't even have these words in the Gemara. And likewise continues the Gemara. Now that we established that both braisos follow the Tanach of Rav Shimon, haktora nami loikashem. And the first braisa it says, and the first braisa was actually brought as a support to Rav Papa, that even the coin that's makdir the emurim will be chayiv if that coin owns chametz. And the other braisa, the second braisa, says that for haktora you're not chayiv, even bishitas Rav Shimon tanoyehi. Like Rashi says that there's a machlokes tanoim bishitas Rav Shimon regarding the haktora. And let's not forget that the whole Gemara began on the bottom of Daf Samach Gimel, right? Reish Lakish says that it goes to the shoichet, to the zoyrek. That's all we mentioned. You're adding now hamaktir. Now, the logic of Rav Papa exists, that the maktir is someone who's also associated to the loyalin, correct? However, that's a machlekes tanoi. The ikad the makdish haktora l'shchita. In other words, the isur of leisishchat is connected to a blood avoida. These are the words of Rashi. Question is, do we consider burning the fats tantamount to a blood avoida? So if you're makish haktora l'shchita, then you'll hold, like the first braisa, like Rav Papa, that the makdir will also be in violation of leisishchat al chametz if he owns chametz. The ikon, which goes to the second braisa, there's another Tanach that holds the loy makish, and therefore we will limit the lav of leisishchat al chametz. What are the next words? Dam zivchi. And even in the first pasuk that we quoted from Parshas Mishpatim, leisizbach al chametz dam zivchi. Fakert, the fact that the Torah speaks about dam, if we don't consider the hekter chalavim ve'avarim as tantamount to a dam avoida, then the fact it's not dam, it's excluded from the lav of leisishchat. Okay, and now let's go and explain the reason behind Rabbi Yehuda and then the reason behind Rabbi Shimon. The Tanach holds pashut. And when we learned yesterday, we quoted the Rashi. Just quickly, Chazer Chaver. There are two psukim that sound similar, but they're not. The first pasuk is on Parshas Mishpatim. There, the pasuk says, "Lo yisizbach al chametz dam zivchi." Don't zvicha means shchita. Just another word for shchita. Don't shecht on chametz the blood of my carbon. Now, what does that pasuk refer to? We don't know when we read that pasuk. A few parshas later, in Parshas Kisisa, it says "Lo yisishchat al chametz dam zivchi." And so the pasuk in Kisisa explicitly is speaking about bringing the carbon Pesach, and there the Torah says, don't shecht. When you're bringing it, don't shecht it on chametz. Fine. So where does Rabbi Yehuda get that we also apply that lav even by the offering of the Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim? Rabbi Yehuda Emer Afa Tamid V'chulei, my Tamid Rabbi Yehuda. So Amalach, that since the Torah uses the words dam zivchi, what's that dam zivchi? What's when God is speaking about my zevach? Hashem could have says dam zevach, the blood of the carbon. Zivchi is alluding to the oil. Zevach hamayuchad li. We find regarding the Tamid, both the morning and the afternoon, that Hashem calls it his. For example, it says karbani lachmi. My bread. You know, it's Hashem has a special connection to our daily Talmud, the consistency that a Yid offers to God.
Rabbi,
So,
at this point, what do we understand is who's Rabbi Yehuda referring to that can't have the chametz? Just the kain that's shechting the Talmud, or Gans Klal Yisrael? Who are we
so we spoke
about?
that out yesterday, that the Rishonim say that for sure by the Karman Talmud, the lav is only going to go on the Kohanim involved in the Avoid if they own the chametz. Because it's impossible to say, you know, they're not in control of that. Who are you going to warn? Every single Yid, how are you going to get to them? Okay. So, Umayniu Tamid, Gavaldik. Now, I just want to add another detail that the Rishonim point out. If you remember when we learned Shitas Toisvus yesterday, the last Toisvus on Daf Samach Gimel, and we said that Shitas Toisvus is that even if someone violated this lav, not like Rashi, Toisvus holds the Pesach remains a good carbon, and Toisvus adds, because there's no Shana Olav HaKosav La'akev. And we asked, how is there no Shana Olav HaKosav? There is Shana Olav HaKosav. You have a pasuk in Mishpatim, you have a pasuk in Kisisa. At least according to Rabbi Yehuda, that kasha you won't have. Because Adarabah, what we are saying is that the pasuk in Mishpatim loy sizbach al chametz dam zivchi, that Rabbi Yehuda is taka going to the Talmud. The pasuk in Kisisa loy sishchat al chametz dam zivchi, and the pasuk continues zevach chag hapasach. That is referring to the two psukim, one for the Talmud and one for the Pesach. There's no repetition regarding the same carbon. Oh, right. Now Rab Shimon holds. We said he is the most stringent opinion. Elomad, there's only one nuance, that even according to Rab Shimon, on Erev Pesach, you will only be over the Slav regarding the Korban Pesach. Just if I made a mistake yesterday, I want to correct it. Not like Rabbi Yehuda. Rab Shimon doesn't know that you'll violate Leisishchat al Chametz during the bringing of the Talmud Shalbein Harbayim. Elomad, Rab Shimon holds that once Pesach comes in, any carbon that's brought, as long as the shechita is considered shechita, because Rab Shimon is the one that holds that shechita she'ena ru'uya is not considered shechita. But as long as at least the avoida is good enough, it's kosher, even when loy olav alam l'shem chayva, you're going to be in violation. Where does he get that from? Again, the pasuk says loy sishchat al chametz dam zivchi v'lo yolel laboker zevach chag hapasach. The pasuk in Kisisa is speaking about a carbon pesach. So my time at Rab Shimon. So if you remember, we just a few weeks ago, we spoke about a midah. At least the Gemara doesn't use the words here, but it's very similar that im einoi inyan teneu le'inyan, when we spoke about the Chassidus behind it, that's very similar to another limud which is called goyrin umaisifin v'darshan, which is that sometimes goyrin means you take a letter off here, and you add that letter in another place. So you create a new word and then you expound that word. Goyrin umaisifin v'darshan. That's what we're going to do over here. It says zivchi trei zimra, which is really what we're pointing out. It says the word dam zivchi in Parshas Mishpatim. It says the word zivchi in Parshas Kisisa. So you know what Rab Shimon does? He takes the yud off the first zivchi. So then you read it zevach. He adds that yud to the other zivchi, making it zivchai, which means from the singular to the plural. Let's read it inside. Karibe zevach zivachai. Zevach, where do you have the zevach without the yud? In Parshas Kisisa. Like we mentioned, Parshas Kisisa speaks explicitly about zevach chag hapesach. So zevach, loisishchat, al chametz dam zevach, when the dam avoid is being done, beginning with the shechita, and according to Rav Papa, even the hektar chalavim, it's called dam avoida, connected to the dam avoida. Don't own chametz. The pasuk in Mishpatim loisizbach al chametz dam zivachai. Dam zivachai means not my sacrifice. Zivachai with two yuds is my sacrifices in the plural. Which sacrifices? All the sacrifices. Ah, beautiful. Goyrin u'moisifin v'darshan. Now, lamai. Furthermore, no nuance. So first of all, if Rab Shimon is teaching zivachai, don't shecht while you own chametz or over chametz, all of my sacrifices, then why do we have to have two psukim? Why don't we include the Pesach in the all my sacrifices? Just write one pasuk with two yuds. And the like kasav, only one pasuk with the words zivachai, my sacrifices. That's the other detail of Rab Shimon. Lameimar, the following: Bisman the zevach. Zevach in singular refers to the carbon Pesach because the zevach, according to this drush, will be the zevach in Parshas Kisisa that the pasuk is speaking about Pesach. Loy mechayev azivachai. During the zman of zevach, then the only time you'll be in violation is regarding the carbon Pesach. And if you own chametz and you bring the Talmud Shalbein or Arbayim, if you own the chametz and you bring a bird carbon, you won't violate loisishchat al chametz. It's only bismanda, like a zevach, a separate pasuk to separate them. Then you're mechayiv on what? On zivachai and all my sacrifices. And here again, the issue of that is shana olav akasav. For sure, there is no shana olav akasav because each parsha, each pasuk is speaking about something completely different. Pesach and all the other karbonis. Okay, and then a detail in Beshitas Rab Shimon, referring back to the Mishnah, that if you bring the Korban Pesach itself on Yom Tov, which is Shaloi B'Zmanoi, and you bring it L'Shmoi, and what's the din, Pesach and Chatas that you bring L'Shmoi, it's Bechlal invalidated. So even according to Rab Shimon, even though the person who brought it owned chametz, he'll be pater. Why? Because like we mentioned, because Rab Shimon holds in Chulin, shchita she'ena re'uya, lav shma shchita. But then the Mishnah says, if you bring a Korban Pesach, shaloi b'zmanoi, and you bring it shaloi l'shmoi, bringing it shaloi l'shmoi makes it into a shlamim, which means the Korban is a kosher Korban, then you'll be chayiv if you own chametz, because Rab Shimon holds any Korban brought during the Yom Tiv, if you own chametz, you're violating this lav. Now here's the nuance. Says the Gemara, time of the shaloi l'shmoi, that if you have in mind shaloi l'shmoi, then you, so to say, you uprooted it from it being a Pesach, you render it into a shlamim, therefore it's a valid Korban, and therefore you're chayiv for owning chametz, which implies hastama. What happens if you have a Pesach? You have the animal, and you didn't bring it at the right time, and you bring it during Yom Tov without any specific intent. Mashma, that by default, it remains a Korban Pesach. A Pesach that's brought Shaloi B'Zmanoi is not valid. If it's not valid, Shchita She'ena Re'uya. Therefore, you're going to be pater. Hold on, Frek the Gemara, that really we're going to have later in Pesachim and Naf Ayin Gimel a Machlokes, whether a Pesach Shaloi B'Zmanoi needs to be uprooted, or the moment it's not in the right time, it automatically becomes a shlamim. So Amai Pesach B'Sharei Ma'aseh, according to one shita, is automatically a shlamim. So why don't we prove from our Mishnah, Shamat Mina, Pesach B'Sharei Ma'aseh, also Baya Akira, to render it into something other than a Pesach, you have to have a specific Havana, Shaloi L'Shmoi. Is that so? And if that's so, why are we having that inquiry on Daf Ayin Gimel? Why don't we prove it from here? So the Gemara says that Omar Rab Chia bar Gamda, that when this question came up in the yeshiva, Nizrika mipi chabura, some idea was thrown into the mouths of the Chavra. And this is what they said, and it's Gavaldik, that our Mishnah is Kegoin Shahoyu Ba'olam Tamei Meis V'Nadacham LaPesach Sheni. There are different types of a Korban Pesach that's not brought on Pesach. The classical case is, I designate a Korban. We are a group. Let's say we're going to get our own Korban. We lost the animal. So what are we going to do? We get another animal, and we bring the new animal. Then we found the original animal. That's the classical case. That animal maybe doesn't need to be uprooted from it being a Pesach. Maybe it's automatically uprooted after Erev Pesach, because what else would you bring it for? The Pesach was brought already. And guys, to save it for next year, we just mentioned, the animal has to be within its first year. It's not shayach that next year the animal will be of the right age. But there's one exception, and that is that we designated the Pesach, or I designated the Pesach, and I became Tamei Meis. I cannot bring Pesach Rishon, but I'm obligated to bring Pesach Sheni. And which animal will I bring? This animal. So this animal should be used for Pesach in a month from now. That animal needs to be uprooted for it to become a shlamim. Because the way it is right now, it should be used for a Pesach. Since the stomei l'shum Pesach koi, which is the case of our Mishnah, then do you know when it's no longer a Pesach? When you have a intention of shaloi l'shmoi. But if you don't have that intention, stoma here, l'kula alma, will remain a Pesach. The boya we're going to have on Daf Ayin Gimel will be, like we mentioned, in the case where the animal will for sure not be used for the Pesach because the owners already brought the Korban Pesach. Okay. Chavre, we're beginning. A lot of what we're going to be learning right now is what we say every year at Pesach in Golus. After Mincha, if you remember the first night of Pesach, after Mincha, we read Seder Korban Pesach. That's exactly what we're going to be doing right now, but a little bit more elaborately. A very long Mishnah, beautiful Mishnah. The Mishnah goes all the way into Samach Daled Amud Beis, and then more details, even more details in the Gemara. Says the Mishnah like this: HaPesach Nishchat b'shalosh kitos. Rule number one: even if all of the Jewish people were to fit in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, there is a rule that the offering of the Pesach must be done in 3 groups. So we're going to have one group, a second group, a third group. Shenemar, where do we get that from? Because since it says in Parshas Bo v'shachatu oisei kol kahal adas Yisrael, every word is in reference to all of the Jewish people. Kahal, right, the assembly, adas, the congregation, and Yisrael. The Torah writes all three of them to tell you need to have a kahal, adas, and Yisrael. In other words, it's an emes that it has to be offered in three groups. How did that work? So it says the Mishnah, the last narrow line. Now, guys, everyone wanted to be from the first group. Zrizin magdim el mitzvahs. Say that. So whoever was able to had the merit, they entered the Azara. When Nismalo Azara, when the Azara got filled, so then no alu de losay so Azara. And as we'll see in the Gemara, there's a machlekes Abaye and Rava exactly how to read these words. Either we close the doors, or miraculously the doors closed by themselves. And there were two reasons why we need to close the door. First of all, halachically, if you won't close the doors, if all the Yidden will go in there, then you won't bring it in three groups. But then there's a danger involved, that there's a crowd control here in America. You can't just pack in people into an environment, and everyone was trying to get in there. So there came a certain point where you needed to close the doors of the Azar. And this, what we're reading right now, is not only connected to the Korban Pesach, but guys, we're going to learn a lot more details of the next one-liner. In Erech and Daf Yud, that Taku, Heriu, V'Taku, this is not with Shoifreis, this is with the Chatzoitzroitz, with the trumpets that they had in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Kohanim were standing, Shurais, there were long lines of the Kohanim. Ubi Yedaim, in the hands of the Kohanim was Bozichi Kesev, either bowls of silver, or Bozichi Zahav, or bowls of gold. Shura Shukula Kesev, the Shura Shukula Zav, Loi Hoyu Me'oirav. And one thing we did make sure is that every row was holding the same quality of Boziach, not in the same row, some silver, some gold. Lines, only silver. Other lines, only of gold. We'll see all in the Gemara reasons for this. And another detail, these basins, these bowls that were used to receive the blood, then these basins were taken to the altar to apply the blood on the altar. They had no base like all the other clay shareis. There was one exception to that, Shema Yanichum, because if they would have a base, then someone can put it down and they might leave it. And once you leave blood for a relatively short amount of time, the Yikra Shadam, the blood might congeal. And now the Shechita begins. So you have the Kohanim already in position. Now we're going to see how many korbanos have to be brought. The Gemara on Amud Beis is going to tell us of a year that they offered, guys, 1,200,000 animals. Animals, guys, one animal is not for one Jew. Groups for every animal. So it was amazing how quick they worked. And V'shachat Yisrael, now V'shachat Yisrael, the Gemara is going to clarify, it doesn't mean that a Yisrael must shecht, but like we learned in Zvachim, that shchita k'sheira v'zhar, even a Yisrael could shecht. A kohen can shecht, a Yisrael can shecht. And now from Kabbalah, mikabbalah ve'elech, it has to be a kohen. The kibbutz kohen, directly from the incision. Now normally the kohen who received the blood, he would walk it to the altar. The whole point of having the shurais is that no, we don't want this kohen to walk it to the altar. He would pass it to his friend. And all in the same line. Now, these Kohanim actually, they were doing two things. They were receiving a bowl filled with blood, and then they were passing back the empty one that's coming back from the Mizbeach. So which movement has to happen first, says the Mishnah? First, Mekabel Asamali, to be careful. First receive the filled bowl, and then Omachser Sarekan, and then pass back, going back to the place of the Shechita, the empty bowl. Okay. Now, the Shechita we know is L'tzfayna Shal Mizbeach. If you remember, we had a three-way machlekes Tanoim exactly where that is. Let's go right there. And finally, when the Kohen who was near the Mizbeach, he was the one that Zor Koizerika Achas, he throws it one time. Guys, there's throwing, remember this? And then you have pouring, very different. We hold that the dam of the Pesach is not poured, but it's thrown. And where is it thrown? Keneged Hayisoid. The Mizbeach had a base. The base completely wrapped around the western side of the altar. The base completely went around the northern side of the altar. Then it went a little bit, it went one amma into the southern side. It went one amma into the eastern side. So Keneged Hayisoid means that you have to throw the dam where on the Mizbeach? In an area that's over the Yisoid. either over the western side or over the northern side of the Mizbeach. When the first group left, the second group entered. And all of the procedures that needed to be done for the first group was Kach, Maisa, Hashniya, and Hashlishis. And let's go back to another detail that happened during all of the three groups. During the beginning from the Shechita until everyone's dam was poured in the Mizbeach, they read the Hallel, and Im Gomru, if they finished the Hallel, and that group still had some people whose carbon was not yet slaughtered, excuse me, Shano, they repeated the Hallel. And if they repeated the Hallel and still the Avodah is going on, is Shilshu, they said it the third time. Says the Mishnah, even though that's the theory, the Kohanim never needed, right? They never finished the third Hallel. If not, you would have to do it a fourth time. So they begin the third time and they never finished it. Rabbi Yehuda says, another detail, they needed sometimes to begin the third Hallel for the first group, which was when the Azara was most full. But when it came to the third group, there weren't that many people. And Rabbi Yehuda is referring to the third group, that Me'imeim shel kat shlishis lo higia le'ahavti ki'ish Hashem for the first time. They never even got to ahavti ki'ish Hashem in the first time. Mepnei sha'amam hu'atim, meaning that everyone really tried to get in there the first time. Everyone tried to get in there the second time, and very few people were left for the third time. Another detail says the Mishnah, Kemaseo b'choil, just like we do this in the weekday. Kach maseo b'Shabbos. If Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, same avoid is done. Pesach is doiche Shabbos regarding the Shechita. However, that the soul system that they had, that there was a water canal, and they used to stop up its exit, and the water used to fill up the floor of the Azara, and that's how they cleaned the floor. This is something that de facto was also done on Shabbos, but the Chachamim were not happy with it. We'll leave that for the Gemara to see why the Chachamim were not happy with cleaning up the floor of the Azara when it was on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, another detail, that every now and then they would take a kois and they would go into the floor. The floor was filled with blood from many karbanis. It was intermingled from many sources. And they would take that blood and also they would throw it on the altar. We learned about this all. And here, again, we'll leave this to the Gemara to explain what was that machloikas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're not done yet. Now that you did the Zrika, now you have to burn the emurim. How do you get to the emurim? You're going to have to suspend the animal and then flay the skin off to get to the innards. So Bachlal, the Mishnah says 3 lines from the bottom that we learned to some Talmud, there were iron hooks that were affixed, that were kavuam in the walls. And in the amudim, guys, remember the amudim, there were 8 amudim. Let's find 8 short pillars. On each pillar, remember, there was a block of wood. On each block of wood, there were 3 rows of hooks on all of the sides. Aside of that, there were hooks on the walls. But when it came to the Koren Pesach, there was so many animals that was not enough. Shabahem on them, toilen, they would suspend the animal the way it was done in the most honorable way. Umafshitan, and they would flay it. All of this is to take out the emurim. Now, kol misha which is what happened at a Pesach. He still needed more areas, so there was no place to hang it on. So what did they do? There were stabs that were thin and they were smooth. They were trees whose bark was taken off, very smooth. And maniach al ksefer val ketev chaveroi, they would put one end of this staff on the kohen shoulder. Then he would put the other one on the kohen opposite him on the other kohen shoulder. So they would create these temporary standing staffs. They were laid out horizontally, and on it the toila, they would suspend the animal, umafshit. Says Rabbi Eliezer, I agree with that if it was not on Shabbos. But you dalid, that if the 14th of Nisan, on top, Shechali is b'Shabbos, so then they didn't use those staffs. They didn't use those staffs. Rashi says it was forbidden to prepare those staffs on Shabbos. Other people understand that there was a muksa issue with the staffs. So what did they use? They used their arms. They used their arms themselves. Maniach yodi al kesef chaveroi, v'yad chaveroi al ksefoi. And then on these two hands, utoila, umafshit, yet another kohen would go ahead. He would suspend the animal and he would flay the animal. Now, once the animal was flayed, what's the next step? Kira'oi, you rip it open. V'hoitze, and you remove es a murav. Just to know, remember we learned this, the word a murav really comes from the word amar. In other words, the stated parts that God stated that have to be burnt on the altar. And they include the kidneys, parts of the liver, the diaphragm, the tail of the sheep, v'chulei, and other forbidden fats that we are not allowed to eat. All of that is what was burnt on the Mizbeach. Where did they put all of these emurav, nesonoi, bamages? There was a special bowl. The bowl that received the dam was called mizrak. The bowl that received, in which you put all of these emurim, are called mages. And v'hiktin alagam mizbeach. Now, another detail, now that we are continuing to learn Rabbi Eliezer that was speaking about Yudalit that falls out on Shabbos. If Erev Yom Tov is not on Shabbos, then everyone would take their carbon and they would go home in Yerushalayim. Of course, you eat it at night and you barbecue it at night, but carbon Pesach is kachay kalam that doesn't have to be eaten in the Makkah Mu'azara. It's not eaten on the Harabayas. However, there is a carrying issue. And therefore, if it's on Shabbos, so Yatzitza Kasri Shaina, and they remained on Harabayas. They followed the Rebbe's directives not to use the Eruv. In other words, there was an Eruv issue. They're not going to take it home. So they stayed on Harabayas.
Wouldn't there be a muksa issue too?
It wouldn't be a
living animal, right? And you're not allowed to roast it till after Shabbos. So for you, it should be muksa.
I have a good question, Danny. Even though it was designated, no, that's not true. It was designated. No. On Yom Tov is meat muksa? No. Why? Because you're allowed to shecht on Yom Tov. We got stuck for a second because on Shabbos, normally on Shabbos, you're right. But since here you're allowed to shecht on Shabbos, it's like Yom Tov. When you shecht an animal on Yom Tov, it's not muksa. You're saying that since you can't roast it, why isn't it not muksa? And not more than that, you can't eat it. That's a good question. Okay. So they would sit on Harabayas. And Shniya, the second group, no, it's the first group, it was a crowd control. They went the furthest away that's permissible. They went to the border inside the Harabayas, but to the border of Harabayas. The second group, they needed to leave the Azara to make room for the third group, but they stayed closer. They stayed in the area known as the Chayil, as we will learn in Midrash. And the Ashlishis, Mama stayed in the Azara. They stayed in that, but Mekayim Medes. Only when Chashecha, then Yatsu V'tzolu Es Pischayim, again, like we said, that roasting the Pesach is not Doiche Shabbos. Okay, let's go. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak.
By the way, nowhere here does it tell us how they track the animals. That's what I'm wondering. You have 1 million animals, and it's Shabbos, and you got to know which one belongs to which group, because if you get the wrong animal, it's no good.
Correct. Amazing. It was amazing. It's borders on the miraculous. Let's go. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Eina Pesach nishchat elo begilmol kitois that we had in the Mishnah. But he's adding another detail. Shal shloishim b'nei adam. Every group needed to have a minimum of 30 people. Now, of course, normally you would have millions of people. But even, God forbid, when there's a very small amount of people, it's not only 3 groups. Each one has to have 30. Why? Rabbi Yitzchak weiter goes to the same limud we have in the Mishnah. Because since the Torah uses the word Kahal, Ada, and Yisrael, and again, Ada we know for sure, Ada, the whole source of a million. Each one is referring to 10. So it means every group has to have 30. Call 10 is 30. And Misap Kalon, he's explaining, we have a doubt if the call, the Ada Yisrael, is referring to Babas Achas. It means one time in one group you have to have 30, or does it mean 3 different groups, and then every group can be of 10. So to cover all the bases, we say both. There has to be 3 groups, and each group has to have 30. Hilkach be'iran shalish kitois of a minimum shal shloishim b'nei adam. First wide line. If that's what the pasuk means, then you got it. You got 30 people in one group. Which would mean that you have to have 3 different groups. Then right there you have 3 different groups. And now the Gemara adds another detail. Even though now we're adding another chumrah to the Mishnah, But don't think you need to have a minimum of 90 people. No, the Mishnah says even if, God forbid, there's only 50 people, you can create 3 groups of 30 each with 50 people. No, go do that math. How do you figure that? How? Because the first group has to be 30. And they will all do it. V'avdi. Then Aili Asara, V'nafki Asara. So what you're going to accomplish is that the second group will only have 10 Jews that did not bring it yet. It doesn't bother us that to be mashlim the 30, you're adding people that already did their mitzvah. It doesn't matter. You have 30 people in the Azara. In other words, you definitely need, a group has to be at least of 10 people that still are mechoyev in bringing it. So that's why you're saying you have to have at least 10. So you only need is 50, 30 in the first group. From those 30, any 10 can leave, or to say that it's first, the new 10 enter, the nafki asara, aili asara, the nafki asara, and you fulfill this minimum obligation. Let's go back to and again, the Mishnah says that at a certain point, the gates were closed. So there's a machlokes how to read the words in the Mishnah. Abaye says that the right version, the text, the Gidus in the Mishnah is Nin Alu, the gates were closed. Not we closed the gates, but the gates were closed. It was a miraculous event. Rabbi says, no, Noy Alin Tanan. The Girsa is they closed the gates, not the gates were closed. My benayu, pashit, ike benayu lemismachanisa. Can you rely on a miracle? Abaya holds Nin Alu Tanan. In other words, everyone wanted to enter the first group. Kama da Ailo Milo. People might get crushed. When God sees it's getting dangerous, God will close the gates. You have to have 3 kitois. Who's counting? Then you spoke about the animals. A bigger question. What's the guarantee that everyone is going to pack in the first time, everyone is going to pack in the second time, and there won't be anyone left for the third time? God is going to take care of that. V'samchina nanisa, agamara. Rav is the one that holds, no, alintanan. No. They closed the gates. V'loy samchina nanisa. Now, guys, just at Chazers, we haven't spoken this out a long time. In Brachas Daf Memches, when the Gemara is recording how both Rava and Abaya, when they were young, they learned by Abaya's uncle and Abaya's stepfather, Rabbi. And the Gemara tells a story that they once ate a meal, and Rabbi asked these 2 youngsters, to whom are we benching? L'mi mivorchinan. So they said to the Rahmana, to God, to the merciful one. So Rabbi asked them, Rahmana Heiche Yosef, where is God sitting? Remember that story? So Abaya went ahead, Rabbi stayed in the house, and he pointed to the Shemei Talala, to the rafters, up there. Abaya went outside and he pointed Klapa Shemayim. So I think this comes from the Rebbe's father, who explains that Rava was connected to what we call the Makiv HaKarev, and Abaya is connected to the Makiv HaRochik. There's different levels of godliness. There's Mamali, there's Soiviv, and each one already as a child related more to either one level or to the other. And this is so connected to our sugya. It's obvious. In other words, if you're pointing up, Abaya is pointing up to the Makiv HaRochik, that above and below is the same, Gashmi and Ruchni is the same, nature and miracle is the same, then Samchinan Anisa, nature is also a miracle. If you're connected to Soiviv, if you're connected to Mamali Kalamam, no, then there's Teva and there's Nes. And if there's Teva and there's Nes, then Loi Samchinan Anisa. Fits. If you're telling me you have a machlokes between Abaye and Rava, so how will you learn the Mishnah in a Duyos, in which, like Rashi goes through the whole detail, it's much getting late, that there was a Chachamim that stated that there was a time that Akavya Memahalal was put into a Cherem, that he was excommunicated, and Rabbi Yehuda argues, impossible. And Rabbi Yehuda Chas v'sholem, she'Akavya B'mahalal nisnadno. That never could have happened. And the way Rabbi Yehuda expressed himself was, she'ein azara nin elas al kol adam b'Yisrael b'chachma u'b'yiras chet ka'Akavya B'mahalal. He said he was the greatest Jew. But the way Rabbi Yehuda expressed himself by saying that he was the greatest Jew is that whenever the gates of the Azara were closed, or whenever they closed the gates of the Azara, if you wanted to know who's the greatest Jew in the group, there was never a time that there was anyone in the group greater than Akavya ben Mahalalel. And Rabbi Yehuda says, if he even once would have been put into a Nidoy, then we wouldn't have said that on him. Now, how do you read the words Nin Elas? Don't forget, they have a machlokes Abaye and Rava. whether it happened miraculously or whether it was done by human effort, but Kahanim closed it. And guys, if Kahanim did it, don't think it was so simple. Sometimes you say, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. You remember this from 770, when you have the Vada Masadir and they're closing the doors against a whole group of Hasidim that L'Shem Shamayim, they want to get close. You need a miracle for them to succeed. Could be there were Kahanim pushing the doors, but God made intervention that chaos should not ensue from it. Anyway, each one will read the Mishnah according to his opinion. Abaye will interpret the Mishnah in Aduyos. Read the words Ein ba'azara b'sha'a shenin alo. When it was closed miraculously, there was no one. I'll call on Yisrael like a kavya b'mahalol. And Rav mitaretz l'taimei. He'll have a different girsa over there in Aduyos. Ein ba'azara b'sha'a shenin alo meiser kol Yisrael. As great either b'chachma or b'yira, certainly in both. Kavya ben mahalol. And going on to this miracle, or even according to Rava, to the need of allowing the Azara not to get overly packed, that indeed, that no Jew was ever crushed in the Azara, chutz. There was 1 year, during Pesach, that was the most busiest time, Erev Pesach, during the lifetime of Hillel, that Shenesmayach boy, the Taka was not a youngster, but he was an older person, he had no koyach, zaken echad, which was a tragedy. And because of that, they would forever refer to that Pesach as Pesach Me'uchen, the crushed Pesach. It crushed everyone. The fact that the Rahman al-Itzlan, a Yid, was crushed to death on Pesach, and we know those who had the schus to be in 770 with the Rebbe, that's like a miracle. That the Taka, we can say that Lo'olam, Lo'inasmayach Adam Ba'azara. Right. Speaking about the fact that there were so many Yidden, all the Yidden came to bring a carbon Pesach. So listen to a census that was once taken. And yes, Rav Baruch, a census may never be taken by counting the people. So you take a census by counting something that comes from the people. So look at the chachma that a king had how to make a census. Now, don't forget.
What was the miracle the Rebbe said? What was the miracle again?
Well, I'm just saying that I think it's a miracle that no one got crushed when the Rebbe was here in 770, when you had thousands of people. That doesn't make sense, and there was no crowd controlling. I'm not saying that it wasn't difficult. It was difficult. But that is what the Gemara says. Is it a miracle? Well, it's tragic that one Zaken passed away, but on the other hand, it's a miracle that all these years happened, and we'll see millions of people went at the Harabayis. It's tragic that it happened once, but on the other hand, it never happened other than once. Okay, Tanach Rabbanan. Pamachas bikesh agrifas hamelach liten einov beuchlusa Yisrael. Liten einov means he wanted to take a census. Now, even today, right? When was the census in these United States? 2020. They come to your doors. Not everyone fills out the forms. It's not so pasha to get a census. So even here, even the goal was not to get the exact number. You want to get as close as possible. So the ideal time, this Agrifas HaMelech thought, was to take a census at least when all the Yidden are bringing the carbon Pesach. But how is he going to do it? So this was his chap. So Amalei the Kohen Gadol, he tells the Kohen Gadol, Tein einecha b'pesachim. I want to count how many Jews by counting how many animals. Now they approximated, as we'll see soon, that every animal was good for over 10 people. I don't know what that means for over 10 people. Does it mean they only counted 10 people per animal and then they knew more or less, or they counted 15 people per animal? But they had a certain approximation of how many people are going to be consuming one animal. So now you have to count the animals and you do times 10 or times 10 plus. But how do you count the animals? Like Danny, you said, so many people there. So his chap is that when you are flaying the animal and you're getting ready to put the emurim on the altar, so part of the emurim are the kidneys. So he tells the Kohen Gadol, not al kulya mikol echad, take a kidney from every animal. I have something little and count the kidneys. And they found that year, v'nimtzu sham, shishim riboy zugei kiloyos. They found 600,000 pairs of kidneys. They took one kidney from each animal. In other words, there was 1,200,000 animals, which is keflayim, double the numbers of the males from 20 to 60 kiyotzim Mitzrayim. Aside of the fact it's not precise, because there were certain Yidden that did not bring the carbon Pesach. Who may not bring the carbon Pesach? A tamei, that chutz mitamei, and the people that Jehoy b'derech rechoika. And furthermore, it's not that there were 1,200,000 Jews. No. There was always more than 10 people. And Taka, by the way, that year was a year that there was a tremendous amount of people, and they called that Pesach Mu'uven, the thick Pesach, the gepakte Pesach. Okay, very nice. Now the Gemara is going to have a halachic issues over here. How was that allowed to be done? First of all, Natal Kulya. How can they take a kidney? Chutzpah belongs to God. Hoboyak, you have to burn it. The Gemara says not. The Kohen Gadol just took it to make the census, and then they burnt it. So it sounds like they had this pile, guys, of 1,200,000 kidneys, and then they burned it. That doesn't work. It says, he shall burn it. It meaning separately. You cannot burn the fats of one animal with the other. You can't take a pile of 1,200,000 kidneys and burn it. So they were saying, no, fine. They counted the kidneys, and then right away they sent it to the Mizbeach. They burnt it one by one. Just a means of grabbing onto something. It was part of the conveyor belt. Part of the belt at one point counted the kidneys. But that's also not good, because if they took out the kidney to count it, even if they sent it back individually, then it might have not been burnt with the rest of the chalovim. That's also not good, because it says v'hiktiram, burn them. In one place it says v'hiktiroi, it. Then it says them. And that means that all of the sacrificial parts of this carbon has to be burnt all together. So enachanami. So the Gemara says they didn't take it out for a long amount of time. You know what they did? Elatfisa ba'alma. There was a temporary seizure. What's shot? That when the bulls were going by, the Kohen Gadol, and under this is the request of the king. Let's say they had a marble, or they had a pebble. They had an item, and they matched a kidney, so they put on the side one marble. When another kidney, they counted the kidney, so they put on the side another marble. You understand? So they didn't even delay that belt, that conveyor belt to happen. They just, for a moment, they just matched an item, a stone, with a kidney. And then they counted the stones, and there were, like we mentioned, keflayim, kiyotzim mitzrayim, in these stones representing the kidneys. Let's go weiter. And the Mishnah says that either holding silver goblets or golden bowls. Maitama, why can you not mix gold and silver? Because Dilma the Shakli the Dahava. Because a Kohen you might be taking away a golden and giving him a silver. He might be holding a golden and holding a silver, and there's a rule, guys. Malan b'kodesh v'loy moridin. Now let's just put this in perspective. Malan b'kodesh v'loy moridin goes to that which is important. When you're doing the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, you know what's important? The avodah, the blood, the gold and the silver is garnished. It's just a keli. But if you're going to give that chashivus, and because of Malan b'kodesh v'loy moridin, so you don't want to have a scenario where the coin is going from at a moment holding gold and then going down to silver. Well, that's a problem. Even when you have golden bowls, they were not all made by the same person. Some Mizrakim were more valuable, some were less valuable. If the emes says there's no issue of Mailam HaKodesh V'Loi Moridin, B'chlal, because it's so insignificant, gold and silver in the Holy Temple. We're serving God with the Avodah, with the mitzvah. We're not even looking at it. So why not mix gold and silver? So the Gemara says only for aesthetic reasons, not for the halachic reasons that Mailam HaKodesh V'Loi Moridin. Elo, the hachi shapert, it's more aesthetically beautiful when you have big rows and the colors are all in alignment. Weiter. All of the bowls indeed in the temple did not have a shulayim, did not have a base. But there was one exception. The bowl, they were small spoons, but we're calling them a baziach, in which you had the frankincense, 2 bazichin, each for a row of the lechem apanim, shalechem apanim, that they sat on the table, machloikis, in menaches, machloikis tanoim, exactly where, but ultimately, whenever the lechem apanim was removed, so were those bazichin. The levoina was offered on the mizbeach, the levoina was the matir. Only afterwards were they allowed to eat the lechem apanim. Those spoons had a proper base, because if they would not have a base, because then maybe they would lean it against the bread itself. The panim bread was not a block, but it was like a U, and the walls were relatively delicate. And if a kohen were to wrongfully use a wall of the bread as a support for the Zajac, now guys, the frankincense was not a liquid. In other words, he would want to support, it was granules. It wouldn't fall out. But still, maybe a kohen would want to have this standing more erect instead of it leaning to the side. So they made a proper base. Weiter. Shachat Yisrael, a kohen shechted, and the kibul a kohen. Says the Gemara, what the Yisrael has to shech. Lo isagya delav Yisrael, is it not good if it's not a Yisrael? Says the Gemara, no. Of course a kohen can shecht. Elama, he go for kamashmalan, that shchita bezar is still kesheda. But then when the Mishnah says v'kibul hakoyen, hakamashmalan, that mikabala ve'elach, the mitzvah has to be with a kohen. Then it says that they didn't walk it to the mizbeach, but they passed it person to person. Whoopa, weiter problem. Shamat mina, why don't we resolve the inquiry that we have over here? The machloikas we have is in Zvachim daf Yudalid, whether hoilacha has to be done by walking it. Let's say you don't have to walk it. Hoilacha, you can pass something without walking. Like when I pass it to you, you pass it to your friend. And that's a question we have in Zavachim. Why don't we resolve in our Mishnah that even though it's hoilacha shlei benegel, it's still called hoilacha. It's a valid method of performing the avodah of conveying. So the Gemara says you can't prove it from here because we can learn that yes, you have to walk a little bit, but Dilma, who noyed purta, that the kohen has to move his feet a little bit towards the mizbeach. Shtickle machloikes. Does that mean all of the kohanim, when they passed it, needed to take a little step? So like they're dancing, they're stepping here, stepping there, or only the last kohen, right before he throws it on the mizbeach, he takes that little step on machlekes, but someone maybe might have to make a movement. So if they have to walk anyway, why did we need all these rows? You can have less kohanim, let them walk a little bit more. That you want to involve as many kohanim as possible. Let's hop around a little bit later. They will receive the first bowl, and then they would return in the opposite direction, the empty baziach. Avolipcha says the Gemara, but the opposite, the kohen first to be involved in the empty, passing back, and then in the blood, loy, and that's a messiah. Let Hashem and Lakish. Put your tefillin in the back of the bag. Don't put the tefillin in the front because you wear the talis first. Push it. The baziach with the full dam, that's the mitzvah of zrika. Even though I'm not throwing it, but I am getting it closer to the mizbeach. Passing back the empty bowl is machshirei mitzvah. I'm helping that the kohen will have a bowl to receive the dam from the new animal that's going to be slaughtered. When it comes to choosing between a mitzvah and machshirei mitzvah, if the mitzvah is in front of you, you have to do the mitzvah first. Let's, it's late. Chabal. Okay, Chabra, we'll stop over here. God willing, to be continued. Easy.
Yeah,
Thank you, Rabbi. Koren Pesach, which is kachim kalam, right? That you can eat. They ate it outside of the Beis Hamikdash, but yes, the shechita had to take care in the Beis Hamikdash, right?
Always. Correct. Yes.
So it's not like they were shechting outside of the.
No, not allowed. No. Generally, the rule is that kachim kalam can be slaughtered anywhere in the Azara, and kachim has to be slaughtered. Let's find hamizbeach. But they all have to be slaughtered in the Azara.
Yeah, but Yisraelim are not allowed in the Azara, right? They're only
Israelim were allowed in the Azara in Machne Yisrael. They were in Ezras Yisrael. I'm sorry, in Ezras Yisrael. That was in. Not only that, a Yisrael was allowed to go all the way up into the Mizbech if there was a need for him to be there. So, for example, smicha, right? Tekev lesmicha shchita. So I bring a chatos. I have to do smicha. I entered where and you remember where is Tzfein HaMizbech? There's three ways. Some people holds that the Tzfein HaMizbech is mamish only to the northern part of the walls of the Mizbech. That's in the Ezras Kahana. The Gemara says that nevertheless, take of smicha shchita. Yisrael has a reason. He would go in there, he would do smicha, then he would walk back out to Ezras Yisrael.
Thank you.